I'd like to welcome everyone to what will hopefully be a lively and robust dialogue on broadband access across the Commonwealth. And during my time as chair of this committee, we have traveled the state, we've held multiple public hearings and issued a report based on the information gathered from experts and witnesses at those hearings. The report included three main focal points for this committee to address. Those priorities included funding, regulatory relief, and maximization of existing assets and infrastructure. The findings of this committee through our report were only amplified in mid-March at the onset of the pandemic. The priorities of this committee have been reflected in the legislation approved by this committee and advancing its way through the General Assembly. Because we all know that broadband connectivity is a Commonwealth-wide problem. It's rural, it's urban, and it's suburban. Now more than ever before, our students, our doctors, and virtually everyone and anyone who is now working from home need access in order to do their homework or do their jobs. Pennsylvania is severely lagging when it comes to ensuring high-speed internet for all its residents, and that is why we knew we needed to make it the focus of this committee. And that is why I knew it was imperative to have today's discussion with key stakeholders, because we know that in order to close the digital divide in Pennsylvania, we need all levels of government, from our counterparts in Washington, D.C., all the way to our township supervisors and local school board directors, along with all of our stakeholders committed to this issue, working together. And today, we are very grateful to be joined by Commissioner Brendan Carr from the Federal Communications Commission and Congressman Scott Perry to share perspectives from our federal government. This will also be a great opportunity for some of our interested state-level stakeholders to make known any issues they still have in this area and to ask important questions to our federal counterparts. As I said, all interested parties need to be working together to do what we can for our constituents in order to expand access throughout the entire Commonwealth. And that is the reason for today's important roundtable, so that we can lay the foundation and put forward bipartisan solutions to continue working on this pressing issue. And with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to my co-chair, Senator Carney, for some opening remarks. Senator Carney.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Phillips-Hill. Thanks to all of you who are joining us today, and a very special thanks to Commissioner Carr and Congressman Perry for joining us. It's always good to see my colleagues here in Harrisburg. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. The pandemic has brought many things into light, and the new normal remains to be seen. What we know is that it will include connectivity. While broadband has always been an issue in Pennsylvania, the amplified need in short order has shown just how big the issue is. Whether it's a virtual telehealth appointment, teachers bringing their classrooms to students, or family members, or contacting their loved ones, broadband access is a necessary part of our daily lives, with multiple users and systems needing access all at the same time. So now is the time to have this conversation about how we can ensure broadband to all individuals within the Commonwealth. Today's that opportunity. And with that, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to get that conversation started.
Thank you very much, Chairman Carney. I would like to let folks who are watching from home know that Senator Carney and I are joined by Senator Pittman, Senator Stefano, virtually by Senator Hutchinson, and we also have Senator Mensch, who is not a member of the committee but interested in learning more, joining us today. And now I would like to turn things over to Congressman Perry and Commissioner Carr to provide any comments.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Carney. Thank you to all members of the panel. I appreciate the opportunity and your interest in this, and of course to everybody that's watching, their interest. And we feel exactly the same way that you do, that this is the issue, one of the defining issues of our age. We have a duty to get, whether it's affordability or whether it's just literal connectability across our state, across the Commonwealth, across the country. This absolutely has to be done. And so we are looking to partner and collaborate with the Commonwealth. Obviously, I'm very honored to represent the district that we're sitting in. This is the 10th District of Pennsylvania, and you know, this is my, I used to work here in the House of Representatives as well, so you know, but the issues, I think a lot of people, when you hear broadband, you hear about rural broadband and the lack of access in rural areas, and that's absolutely true, but there are access issues right here in the city of Harrisburg as well, and it might not be for the same reason. The broadband may be there, but it's affordability, or it might be the speed and the technology associated with the broadband. And unfortunately, from my perspective as a proud member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we would deal with the funding that would assist in the policies regarding the infrastructure build-out of broadband, we have not produced a viable product out of Washington, D.C. Essentially, we spent a year and a half not doing a transportation and infrastructure bill, and I don't have to tell the members of the panel here that infrastructure is one of those issues on a bipartisan basis that cuts across those bipartisan divisions. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, everybody in between know that we have citizens that are paying, that are supportive, and that want their needs to be met. But there is a timing issue to get these things accomplished, and unfortunately we didn't meet that, and we did finally move a bill out after about a year and a half, but unfortunately it didn't have bipartisan support. It was, you know, I hate to discuss this among everybody, but I'm sure the people on the panel understand the mechanics, the process of it. So after the markup, what we consider a markup, where you make the amendments to the bill in committee, and the week that went in between that and when it went to the floor, $1 trillion was added to the bill in 1,400 pages to read right before the vote on the House floor, and that makes it, you know, unfortunate. So we missed the mark on that, and we're going to absolutely have to come back on that. And I think that everybody is waiting to see what happens this November, to see what the makeup will be, and then what kind of arrangements we can move forward. But we are absolutely committed, I think, certainly in Washington, D.C., on both sides of the aisle, to move forward to deal with all the issues. I'm so happy to be joined by the commissioner here today. And one of the other issues that I hope that he will discuss, actually two of them, one is net neutrality and the effects of financing for the companies that actually provide the hardware. It costs a lot of money, and you have to have a return on investment. And the policies that come out of Washington, D.C., whether legislative or by rulemaking, have a great impact. And we saw that the net neutrality had a chilling effect from a financing standpoint across the Commonwealth and across the country. And so we stopped literally building out because we couldn't afford to do so. There was no return on investment. And the other thing is the security side of 5G. We don't want to be building out a network that is obsolete as it's being constructed. And unfortunately, we're dealing with what's not. I know it's oftentimes been described as a strategic competitor in China, but China is definitely a strategic adversary, if unfortunately not a strategic enemy, and certainly in this space. And so the architecture of 5G, we cannot rely on Huawei or ZTE or other Chinese firms for the architecture. We cannot allow them to have access to Americans' data and then use that to America's disadvantage. And while they have run out and bought out or simply dumped into the market and bankrupted their competitors across the globe, we're going to have to take some time and some careful thought about how the United States government promotes production of that stuff in a free market by free countries, but not only production of it that does not mirror the exact same technology as the Chinese technology, because even though it might be by another name, it's still vulnerable if it is the exact same architecture. And I hope the commissioner will speak to that a little bit, but I'm very much privileged to be here with you today, and I'm happy to have the discussion with you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Congressman Perry. Commissioner Carr.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for the invitation to join you. Thank you to the leadership of the committee for your focus on this. It's really hard to imagine an issue that is more important to the education of our kids, to accessing health care, to economic competitiveness, job creation, than expanding the build out of high-speed internet. So I really want to commend you in particular for your leadership on this. I know you've been working on a number of bills that would help accelerate this. And it takes this type of effort here. It takes partnerships and discussions among stakeholders at the federal, state, and local level to get the job done. I think as the congressman indicated, this is an issue in Pennsylvania and across the country where for too long we had too many communities that were left behind. They were left on the wrong side of the digital divide. The congressman talked about sort of heavy-handed utility-style regulation, and he's exactly right. When we look back at 2015, 2016, we were really headed in the wrong direction. Everyone, I think, is exactly right on the importance and the value of high-speed internet, and so we tend to think of it as other things that are very important like utilities, and it is correct in the sense of the value and importance of it. It is not correct in terms of how you regulate it from a heavy-handed perspective. At the end of the day, we want competition for internet, we want choice, we want to incentivize investment, and monopoly-style, utility-style regulations are all designed to do a very different thing, which is to regulate one, right? You don't have competition, you don't have choice for utilities, that's why you need heavy-handed regulation. For internet, we want competition, we want choice. We think that's the best path forward. So we have to create an environment that's going to incentivize massive investment. When I look at the steps we've been taking at the FCC over the last couple of years, our number one priority has been closing the digital divide. And it really paid off over the last 6 months or so when you look at obviously the most important issue we're facing right now as a country, which is our response to COVID-19. As lockdown and stay-in-place orders spread across the country, in an instant, all of our lives moved onto the internet, more so than ever before. Whether it's for educating our kids, accessing telehealth, working remotely, our internet infrastructure went through a sudden and surprise stress test. We saw internet traffic spike up to 30% on networks, which may not sound that much in the abstract, but when you plan for network traffic, we're talking about overnight going traffic levels that internet providers didn't think they would see for a year and a half or 2 years. So that gradual spike that they're used to seeing in growth in traffic accelerated virtually overnight. And the great news is America's internet infrastructure held up under that sudden strain. And our counterparts in many other parts of the world weren't so lucky. They saw similar increases in traffic, and they saw significant degradation in the quality and performance of their network. In Europe, regulators asked Netflix and other streaming providers to degrade the quality of their service because they were afraid that the capacity demands on the networks were going to result in their internet infrastructure essentially collapsing. We didn't have that issue in the US. Our networks performed during the pandemic very well, and in fact, on the mobile wireless side, internet speeds in the US actually increased. So in addition to the networks performing very well, one of the things that we immediately did at the FCC was work on expanding Americans' access to telehealth. We stood up in a matter of days from when Congress passed the CARES Act, an emergency COVID-19 telehealth program. And stepping back, one of the things that we've seen in telehealth is not just needing high-speed internet connections to brick-and-mortar hospitals, but now you have a range of what we call connected care options, which are applications right on your smartphone, video visits you can do with a doctor or psychiatrist right from your home. So we wanted to support that trend in telehealth, not just high-speed connections at hospital, but the high-speed connection you need at your home, particularly with stay-at-home orders, to access quality care. And the way we describe it is we talk about it as the healthcare equivalent of shifting from Blockbuster Video to Netflix. You don't have to go to a brick-and-mortar facility to receive care. So we stood up this emergency COVID-19 telehealth program. It was $200 million. We awarded money to almost every state in the country. Pennsylvania in particular had 34 awardees that won funding from that program, totaling nearly $10 million, about $9 million, which I think was one of the largest total fundings for a state that we had in the country. In fact, I'll be visiting later today with the Pittsburgh Medical Center's Harrisburg Hospital, which was one of the recipients of that program, to see how they're putting it to use. The FCC did a number of other steps during COVID-19. We added more spectrum to the marketplace where needed. We waived lifeline rules so low-income Americans could stay connected, and we enabled providers to give away free hotspots. Stepping back from that more broadly, our efforts to close the digital divide focus on sort of 2 or 3 main areas. One is infrastructure. At the end of the day, building out high-speed internet is construction projects. It's turning dirt. And again, back in 2015 and 2016, it cost too much to build internet infrastructure in this country. It took too long in terms of permitting and approvals. And so we went to work at the federal level. We addressed some of the federal environmental and historic preservation laws that maybe they made sense for large 200-300-foot towers. But they didn't make sense for the small cells and other next-gen infrastructure we need for 5G and other high-speed connections. So we modernized some of that. We also took a look at some of the state and local processes. We had a lot of small-town mayors across this country that said, we want high-speed internet here, but it's slow coming to us because it oftentimes costs too much to build out in large must-serve cities like San Francisco or San Jose, and that sucks up the capital needed to build out to our communities. So we built on some state and local ideas and put some guardrails in place so that you don't have exorbitant fees in big cities and people provide the up or down on permits on a timely basis. And we've seen a massive acceleration in infrastructure builds since taking that action. When you combine it with our work on net neutrality, where we eliminated heavy-handed rules, when you look at the permitting red tape we've cut, internet speeds in this country are now about double where they were at the end of 2016. Internet providers on the wireless side invested $29 billion in their networks just last year. That was a record high. They invest about 70% more in their networks than their counterparts in Europe, again, driven in large part by a very different regulatory regime, much more heavy-handed in Europe. We had more miles of high-speed fiber built out in this country last year than ever before. So I think we've turned the corner in the sense we're making progress, but we shouldn't kid ourselves and try to fly the mission accomplished flag at this point. There's still too many homes and small businesses that don't have service. One other initiative that we're working on right now is called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. In Pennsylvania alone, we've identified 190,000 premises, homes and small businesses that have absolutely no internet service today. And we are allocating up to $700 million over 10 years to incentivize providers to build out to those 190,000 locations. We're going to do what we call a reverse auction, and it's going to start at the end of this month. We have other funding mechanisms that we're working on as well. And I think that boils down to the key. Infrastructure, we got to make sure that scarce dollars are actually going into the ground, building out, not lining the pockets of big cities or otherwise getting caught in needless red tape delays. And we need to make sure the funding is there, because while we cut red tape and that helps, to truly close the digital divide, we need to incentivize providers to build in parts of this country where there's never going to be a business case. It can cost $30,000 to run a mile of fiber. You talk about parts of this country that have one or fewer people per square mile, the private sector is never going to get a sufficient return on investment to do that. That's why this universal service fund, where this rural digital opportunity funding is coming from, is so important. And the Senator and I talked briefly about mapping before this as well. We had an outdated approach, frankly, at the federal level that didn't let us accurately target funding. Our maps counted an entire census tract or census area as covered if one person could get service, didn't even have service, could get service at some point in the future. We're now scrapping that approach and going to a much more granular effort. And one of the thoughts I want to lead with you is workforce. We could hire about 20,000 more tower techs alone to complete this country's 5G build. And there's a shortage of these skilled workers, not just tower climbers, but linemen and other trade workers that build out internet infrastructure. So I've looked at a 5G jobs initiative that leans on community colleges as pipelines for moving workers into this space. And so we got to work on all of that. We got to push more spectrum out there, which we're doing at the FCC, cut red tape on infrastructure, make sure our funding is oriented towards areas that truly have no service, and then make sure we have the workforce. But again, we're making progress. 5G right now is live here in Harrisburg. I think that's a far better measure of the progress we're making than the first time 5G was live in New York or San Francisco, but there's a lot more work to do to fully bridge the digital divide, and I look forward to continuing to work in partnership with all of you until we really do get this job fully done.
Commissioner, thank you so much. And I think that much of what you have identified, those are the things that we're trying to target at the state level as well. And Just a few housekeeping notes, if I may. All of the mics currently for the folks who are joining us via Zoom are muted, and you will have to unmute yourselves in order to speak. But I will say this, I'm going to first open up the discussion to all of the committee members, and then open up the panel discussion to all of the stakeholders. So want to make sure that our members are able to ask questions first. And if I may start with a question. Federal CARES dollars that have been allocated to the states, we can use those for internet connectivity and projects. And I'm not sure whether I should address this to you, Commissioner Carr, or to you, Congressman Perry, but one of the things that we're hearing is that those federal CARES dollars need to be expended prior to the end of the year. And I think you probably know, unfortunately, they're as hard as we have been working both at the federal and the state level to reduce the amount of red tape that providers encounter, it still takes about 45 days to get a permit, and shovel-ready can mean different things in Pennsylvania than in other parts of the country. Is there any conversation about extending the deadline for connectivity projects, CARES dollars, expenditures beyond the end of the year? Has that conversation taken place?
Thank you, Senator. To the best of my knowledge, the conversation is not taking place at the time, but that doesn't mean, that just might be, from my perspective, we are probably primarily focused on another package that we can somehow come to an agreement on, whether it's more PPP, something that's more or less targeted. I think the Senate's poised to pass a bill today or tomorrow on additional funding, but we're not, as far as I know, the Speaker has told us we're not coming back in before the election, so it would languish at least until that period of time. But I would also say this, when the expiration of things like PPP and unemployment compensation and the EIDL loans coming through SBA were also expiring because they were finitely legislated based on what we thought about the pandemic when it was occurring. I and others went to the President, to the administration, and said that these deadlines are no longer valid and they're not helping our constituents because, this is going on much longer than we presumed that they would, and we were able to change those deadlines, and we did that. So I think that even though I might not know of a conversation currently occurring, number one, it's not to say that it isn't. It might be. It just I might not be aware of it. Number two, we have shown the ability and the willingness to do that in the past, and I think that the idea was to get the money out to the folks in the industries that needed it in a timely fashion. And if it's not working that way because the pandemic has gone on longer than we anticipated, or because we didn't anticipate regulatory issues or permitting issues or what have you, that we can be and should be and will be flexible. I'm absolutely certain I can speak on behalf of the administration that they'll have an open ear to that. If we can get the members of Congress together on it, that's a little dicier proposition, but I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail and we will keep our constituents in mind and do what's needed to be done in that case.
Well, I certainly appreciate that and know that, York County and counties across the Commonwealth are working hard to deploy CARES dollars to meet the needs of the people of this Commonwealth, and don't want to see, regulatory burdens and permits become an impediment to increasing connectivity because, as you said, Commissioner Carr, now more than ever, connectivity is so very, very important. I'd like to turn it over to Chairman Carney for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Phillips-Hill. The idea of granularity, I think, is really kind of at the heart of what the issues are. It's very easy to sort of think about the broadband issue from 50,000 feet, and much more difficult when you get down on the ground in particular neighborhoods and everything else. I know, Commissioner, you mentioned that you were hoping for a marketplace solution to how this, to the problem. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it, but I think it's been at the heart of what the problem is now. I mean, certainly in my district in Delaware County, we have lots of connectivity and lots of availability for it, but that we have, I have school districts where 40% of the kids in the school don't have access to broadband for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's, we all understand how difficult it is to get out to some rural areas because of distance and because of everything else, whatever. But we have neighborhoods that don't have access to the internet because the companies can't make any money there. They're, even the Internet Essentials, the Comcast program, which is a great program, doesn't really go far enough because it can't get down to the granularity that it's required for the use really in the school districts. So I'm happy to hear that you're coming up with programs that are going to incentivize companies to actually kind of do that. It's just a question about how, if that can possibly be big enough incentives to actually do the kind of job it needs to do without some more nudging from the federal government or from the state government. I know that's not really a question, more of a comment, but it's.
Very
Okay.
good.
Yeah, well, it's.
Thank you, Chairman Carney. Yes, certainly, Congressman Perry.
So, and I think your comment is well founded. We're trying to, I think, balance what we see in America as a free enterprise system. Certainly, the competitive market that the commissioner mentioned, and we feel that that's the best approach. But there are folks who are going to be left in a gap because of that. And that's where we're trying to make sure that the policy fits the needs on both sides without creating more problems, and sometimes that's what the federal government does. And I was talking to the commissioner just prior to this, and maybe we can have at least a portion of the discussion about this. The technology is working, it's probably working more quickly than we're having the conversation right now, but as the use of the internet and the innovations of the internet occur, it's also occurring that these new innovations with providing the service are coming as well. And in talking to a group called SpaceX, in my lifetime, when I watched the United States put a man on the moon, that was the federal government and that was NASA. And that's the only, in our minds at that time, that was the only institution, the government, the taxpayers of America were the only, it was the only entity capable of accomplishing such a mammoth task. But now in this day and age, you got SpaceX. How many satellites have they deployed? But they're going to put an array of satellites around the globe to provide internet service to you. And unless this is far-fetched from where this conversation should go in this committee, but the potential things that are going to happen in the next 20 years from space, whether America does it or somebody else does it, are just mind-boggling. But the point is that there's another vehicle other than pulling fiber through the ground or across telephone lines, and that's coming. The question is how good will it be? Because we have a perception that it's going to be as good as what's out there now, which is not good, right? You run out of bandwidth, so to speak, or the use of it before the month expires based on your utilization and everybody else's. It's so limited, right? But I think we're going to see something very, very different very soon. The question is it going to be affordable to folks, and are they going to be able to have access to it? But I think it's important to discuss that so we don't kind of put blinders on about the policy that only references what we think we know right now, because there are more things coming.
Yeah, the congressman is exactly right, and I want to obviously commend him for his leadership on trying to expand internet access. And we are at this interesting inflection point. We are on the cusp of having much more technological competition than we've ever seen. He mentioned SpaceX. They have a couple hundred satellites that are already in orbit. They're launching at a cadence that's continuing to increase. So when you look at the future of connectivity, it's not just going to be your wireless provider and your fixed wireline provider. We've got this new generation of SpaceX satellites that are going to be high-speed, low-latency services, the type of stuff that previously you may have needed a fixed connection for. We've got next-generation wireless cellular 5G. One of the first use cases of 5G is competing in the marketplace for in-home broadband, that you can ostensibly cut the cord, or you can use wirelessly serve a home that there isn't a wired connection to. We have a new generation of what we call fixed wireless services. These are actually sort of scrappy mom and pop providers. I'm gonna try to meet up with one here just south of Harrisburg later today. So you have fixed wireless competing as well. So I think when you look at all of this, from the new generation of satellites to the new fixed wireless, new 5G, and then the massive investment we're seeing on traditional fixed, we are going to see more competition than before, but we continue to need to support builds in areas where it's not going to be economical.
Certainly.
Sorry. Thank you, Commissioner and Congressman. You know, I think it's just it's a product somehow of the COVID-19 crisis too, right? That we have, all of a sudden we have this magnifying glass thrown on these inequities that we see in our society. And broadband in particular is such a game changer for families when they can literally have access to it and it can actually work to them. So that's kind of where I was trying to get with the granularity thing, is that's the aspect of the here and now, and it's like there's a fierce urgency to it at this point, because we have so many kids who are trying to get on the internet to do their classwork, let alone their homework, and that's today. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman Carney, and I will echo what you said. This committee has worked very hard not to prioritize one type of service or one type of provider over another, but just to create a level playing field where everyone can compete, where, you know, recognizing that we're going to need different types of services in different areas for different people with different needs, and just creating the opportunity for them to have that connectivity. And with that, I would like to recognize the gentleman from Fayette County, Senator Stefano.
Thank you, Chairwoman. You've touched upon everything that I was thinking about to present today. You know, what we're seeing is that a lot of the low-hanging fruit's already been picked. And now we're going to be investing, you know, every dollar that we have tax-wise is a precious dollar. So we want to make sure we're investing it correctly. And I wanted to ask Commissioner from Carr about your perspective. You know, I use my past as a guide as I'm looking forward, and I come from the printing industry, and back in the 90s we had this problem with technology developing so quickly. By the time you invested in something, it was obsolete before you even implemented it. And now we're seeing the same thing happening here. We're going to be investing because, like I said, all the low-hanging fruit's picked. So now we're going to need a combination of public-private dollars to get out to these corners where we're not covering. But how do you, from your perspective, address that issue when we know technology is changing? How would you not put your thumb on a scale in one area? You just mentioned it costs a lot of money to draw fiber, but what if fiber is not the right answer? How do we know? I just wanted to get your perspective on how you wrestle with that thought at the FCC.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. One of the things that we do now is when it comes to these funding mechanisms, we pay for performance. So it used to be, for instance, that fixed wireless providers weren't even eligible to bid in our funding mechanisms. SpaceX low Earth orbit satellites have never been recognized as being eligible to bid, and we've changed that. So now we set out a requirement, you know, here's the speed you have to meet to bring to this many households, here's the latency you have to meet, and if you can do it with your technology, have at it. It's a pretty good policy. It's not uniformly popular, including among incumbents that used to have a better chance of bidding for it because they didn't have competition from fixed wireless or satellite. And to be honest, you know, not all technology is the same. If you do run a fixed fiber line, you get some knock-on benefits. You can connect cell sites with that fiber. You know, it can handle more capacity than others. But at the same time, I think all of that can be built into the bid when fixed fiber providers are bidding against low Earth orbit satellites or bidding against 5G fixed. They can price in the fact that they can also sell access and other points along the way. So paying for performance is what we're doing now at the FCC, and that's a change from just a couple years ago.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pittman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Congressman, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. Just to echo what Senator Stefano said, I found that the rapid development of the technology has almost created a paralyzing effect on local governments because they're afraid to make significant investments in technology that may in fact be obsolete. And I don't know how we achieve a balance in making decisions and moving forward versus waiting for the next great thing. And I suppose that's a difficult public policy decision that often local governments have to reconcile. But a lot of the conversation of accessibility ties into affordability. It seems that it's accessible anywhere if you can afford it. Where do you look at affordability rates? Do you look at it based on income levels, census data, census tracts in terms of affordability? Because obviously that's different to everybody. Is that factored into some of the equations as you move to help roll out?
Access and affordability are the two key components of bridging the digital divide. We put a lot of focus on access just because we need to incentivize, many miles of builds in rural areas, but affordability is an issue everywhere. We take very limited information on rates and affordability. We have what's called an urban rate survey that looks at a limited set of data. There are some pushing for the FCC to take in more information on rate data. One of the issues there, of course, is you can take that too far and you can sort of suggest or go down the path of the FCC regulating rates themselves. And then when you have the government stepping in to set rates, very easy for us to set it too high, very easy for us to set it too low. And either way, we are going to sort of spook investment that we need when we're talking, again, $29 billion invested last year by wireless. So I think we need to tread very carefully. One of the best things we can do is increasing competition, and we've seen that has a direct effect on driving down prices for consumers.
Because the problem is when you build infrastructure, for example, Indiana County's investing almost $2 million of CARES funding. We're fortunate that they're ready to go on it, but it will be a captive provider, to your point. So the infrastructure is being rolled out, the county owns the infrastructure, but the provider is a captive provider. And the consumer then becomes beholden to that specific provider. And I struggle with how you bring in that competition whenever you build the infrastructure from a public domain and instead of having the private sector build it and then be the only game in town. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a challenge. What we have seen and what we rely on at the FCC is anytime someone is setting their prices too high, it creates a market opportunity for another entrant. We've got a lot of disciplining function with these, low Earth orbit satellites that are going up. There was a Native American tribe, I believe in Eastern Washington, that now has high-speed service delivered by SpaceX. And so our goal always is to incentivize competition and to rely on market forces, and having the federal government come in and regulate prices really has a depressing impact on internet builds. In fact, when you saw a pullback in internet investment in this country after the Title II utility-style decision that we entered into at the end of the last administration, all that decrease in investment, according to some economists, was purely based on a fear of the FCC stepping in and engaging in rate regulation. That the actual net neutrality rules themselves don't block, don't throttle, are actually fairly uncontroversial at this point. It is the threat of rate regulation that had the billions of dollars exited the market.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Pittman. For a question, Senator Mensch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congressman, always good to see you. Commissioner, welcome. I spent 35 years in the industry, so some of what I'm going to talk about is what I understood from that experience. But there used to be a concept called universal service, which provided more than 99% of the homes in America with telephone service. It was funded by something called guaranteed rate of return, which was regulated by the PSCs, the PUCs, and of course the FCC on an interstate basis. With breakup of the Bell system, we lost the incentive of guaranteed rate of return for capital investment. So while we talk about different technologies and we talk about different companies here, the issue is investment and return. There are still, in Pennsylvania, there's 80-some ILECs, RLECs, CLECs, all of them providing some level of communications to the homes in Pennsylvania. Have you ever thought about a hybrid, and maybe this is something we have to talk about at a PUC level, but have you ever thought about a hybrid guaranteed rate of return working with the existing or the incumbent providers and the new investors for fiber or for coax to be able to provision locally some level of internet services, broadband as we commonly refer to it? I know the 5G is coming. I know that SpaceX is coming. We all would welcome that. But for the short term, we still need these vendors to be able to make the investment. And they're not going to make the capital investment if they don't have the return. We used to have a model that encouraged that return. Can't we do something in a hybrid fashion?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. Thanks for your leadership on this and your deep experience on this from working in the industry. What you talked about, obviously, was this concept that we used to have, what we call implicit subsidies, basically. More profitability from serving densely populated areas would offset internally the cost of serving higher cost areas. We've now moved to, obviously, this concept of explicit subsidy with the Universal Service Program. This is that $10 billion a year fund that we have. The approach that we've adopted right now is to say, you can have to serve, X 100,000 communities. If you serve those communities, we'll give you Y dollars. And providers now bid down from Y. So they say, all right, provider A will serve for Y, provider B will serve for Y minus. And we find that creates the incentive now to serve everybody in that area. And we think it's more efficient to do the bidding down of the subsidy rather than setting a specific rate of return. But I understand your point that there's different ways of doing it.
But I would argue that even with your model today, that population density influences where you're going to be able to bid for that bandwidth or that spectrum. So we need to, the consideration here is for that homeowner who is the last mile. And how do we get this costly technology deployed effectively for them? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mensch. And I think that it's fitting that we are all connected over the internet via Zoom to have this hearing today. And the state and local perspectives who are joining us today include Sherry Collins, who's the Senior Director, Office of Corporate Relations for the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, Steve Samara, who's the President of the Pennsylvania Telephone Association, Frank Budzlowski, who is the Director of Government Relations for Verizon, Dave Kerr, President of External Affairs, AT&T Pennsylvania, Brian Barno, Vice President of the Broadband Cable Association of Pennsylvania, Dr. Celeste Schwartz, who's Vice President for Information Technology at Montgomery County Community College, Ryan Morcrete, Senior Clinical Communications and Telehealth Specialist, St. Luke's University Health Network, Dave Lohr, Fayette County Commissioner, Sam Jajuwite, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly, Chief Information Technology Officer, Bloomsburg University, Bill Ballant, Chief Information Technology Officer, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, Wayne Campbell from the Pennsylvania Grange, Darren Euchre, Director of State Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau, Matthew Leonard, Manager of State Government Affairs for the Pennsylvania Rural Electric Association, Superintendent McMahon Vargas, Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools, Al Motley, Tech Academics, Tamia Scipio Smith, Public Citizens for Children and Youth, Joshua Motzer, Director of Government Affairs for Lumen, Sandy Fayok, Vice President, Purchase Line School Board, and Marilyn Hine, MD, Pennsylvania Medical Society. So as you can see and hear, we have a diverse group of individuals who will be joining our conversation, and I would like to now recognize Tamia Scipio Smith from Public Citizens for Children and Youth for a question. And remember, you need to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, thank you.
Indeed. Good morning again, Senators and Commissioner Carr. Thank you for the opportunity to present a question at this roundtable discussion. My name is Tamia Scipio-Smith. I'm the Education Policy Director at the child advocacy organization, Public Citizens for Children and Youth. As you know, this year, more than in any other, communications and technology has played a key role in how America educates its children. And the differences in access to technology and the quality of the technology that many students can access has been very stark and eye-opening since the pandemic hit. We've spoken to superintendents and educators around southeastern Pennsylvania, and we've heard time and time again how that inability to access computers, technology, high-speed internet, broadband, all of these things have played a significant role in their ability to educate children in light of this pandemic and giving them access to become competent individuals in the workforce with the technological skills that they will need. My question is, what regulatory and financing tools beyond the federal E-rate program are available to states and municipalities that, if tapped, can close the digital access gap for public students?
Thank you so much for the question and for your work on this issue. I'm looking up at the screen over here, but maybe I'll look forward for now. One area of funding that I didn't mention in my testimony is the Department of Education has a $16 billion fund that I believe also came through CARES Act funding that is used for, I believe it's called an Education Stabilization Fund. The FCC has been partnering with Department of Education on that. I don't have a current update on where that funding mechanism is, but that's one potential avenue of funding for connecting school kids that we haven't testified about yet. Again, that builds on the $700 million that will be coming to Pennsylvania through the RDOF. But again, the RDOF, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, is a longer-term build project. There may be some avenues through the $16 billion DOE funding mechanism for even more immediate connectivity in the state.
Thank you very much. And I will say this, there are many providers on this Zoom meeting, as well as across this country, who have been working with individual school districts. And I would say if you have a particular school district that is struggling to reach out to those providers, I can tell you from my experience in York County that they have been very helpful. So.
Yeah, I think to that point, just even one just comes to mind. There was a Verizon project in, I believe, Georgia, where they partnered with the Department of Education to offer connectivity to school kids. And I believe that program was so successful, they've opened that up now to every state. So if there are school districts or superintendents that they could potentially add on to that program that Verizon struck with the Georgia Department of Education.
It's good to know. Thank you very much. I'd now like to recognize Dr. Marilyn Hine from the Pennsylvania Medical Society for a question. Dr. Hine.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you so much for the opportunity to engage in this really enlightening discussion. It's been very informative. And the Pennsylvania Medical Society is very supportive of expanding broadband and ensuring connectivity to make sure that everyone has access to telehealth services. It's very important that we do not widen the digital divide in healthcare, and it is key to ensure affordable access to patients' homes and physicians' practices. This is truly an issue of health equity. It's essential that health insurers do not sever the patient-physician relationship by steering patients to other providers, as we have seen. As we seek connectivity, we would really appreciate legislative assurances that the connection between the patient and the physician is safeguarded as we go forward. Thank you.
This is Congressman Perry. I'd like to continue the discussion with you if I could, and we can do that some other time or what have you, but I can tell you that we are looking at a series of bills and legislation right now, but it mostly, I think, is in regard to how physicians receive payment for telemedicine and the fact that I don't think anybody in the industry at this point wants to see the current advent of the increased usage of telemedicine be a temporary thing that is only sustained through the pandemic, when hopefully whenever that ends, but that it can, because of the things we've learned. We think that, and I think everybody feels this in the industry and certainly in our homes and you know, in the healthcare industry, that we have been forced, but this is one of the silver linings in the cloud, to move forward on telemedicine far beyond where we would have been at this period of time. But I'm not sure I've heard the issue that you brought up be part of the discussion, and so I'd be happy to continue the discussion with you at some other time about that, because we certainly want to get this right, and we have a moment in time now where we're considering this legislation, and I think everybody is generally on board, but we don't want to miss the opportunity. So I welcome your comments.
And thank you so much, Congressman, for the opportunity to have met with you earlier, and Chris in your office, to discuss these issues. And we really appreciate your interest to make sure, as you say, that we get it right, and that we make sure that patient care goes forward in a positive way. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heinen. I can tell you we've had conversations here at the state level and through my work with the Intergovernmental Advisory Committee at the FCC, talking about removing barriers. You know, oftentimes people who live in Delaware and New Jersey seek medical care in Philadelphia because of the concentration of high-quality healthcare options there, and making sure that those state boundaries don't create barriers. In York County, we have people who go over the line into Maryland for healthcare for a variety of reasons, and so making sure that those things all work correctly so that you keep that important relationship between a physician and their patient is certainly something that we all need to be mindful of at every level when we work on this issue. So I thank you.
Thank you.
I see that Sam Jesuit from Bloomsburg University has a question. Please, thank you so much. And again, my apologies if I have not appropriately pronounced your name.
You're close. It's Josue. Good morning, Chairman Phillips-Hill and the committee. I want to thank you all for having us here to speak on behalf of Bloomsburg University and the state system of higher education. My name is Sam Josue. I'm Chief Technology Officer here at Bloomsburg. I have 35 years of experience in the IT and telecom fields, and I've been at Bloomsburg for 18 years. I'm also a father of 5, and my youngest son is currently a sophomore at Bloomsburg. And I live in a rural area, Ross Township in Luzerne County, that currently has no adequate options for broadband internet. My question would be that if I look at the inconsistency in a lot of these areas, where in my case, broadband high speed might be available within a half a mile, what metrics are being used to measure these areas? It's hard to quantify by zip code, by county, by township. So I'd be interested to see, how that's being measured and how future improvements are being measured.
So at the federal level, we had these outdated maps that I have described sort of like an old Pinto, and we would sort of change the bumper, maybe change the tires every once in a while, but we never fundamentally revisited the method. And to your point, it was just not fit for the function that we need right now. So we have decided to scrap those old maps and start fresh. And what we're doing is this much more granular, what we call a fabric, to identify with precision exactly where internet service is and isn't, based on specific premise information. And it will take some time to do that. And we've actually asked Congress for some significant funding to finalize and finish up that map. But the good news is we've finally scrapped that old approach and are going to have much better vision going forward about where internet access is, and that way we can target our funding appropriately.
It's going to take a while. That's the university and where he lives where Sam lives, he can't wait. He's got a student in college right now. We get that. This is the frustration of not moving a bill that could have been passed and that the president would have signed a year or better ago. This is the frustration because folks are waiting and we're not getting the job done.
I think we all have those frustrations at whatever level of government. We don't always work as quickly as we would like to. And I can tell you, colleagues of mine, when I first embarked on trying to address this issue, colleagues you and I both know well, looked me in the eye and told me that I was on a fool's errand, that nothing was ever going to happen and I was never going to be able to make anything better. And so, undeterred, partnering with great people across this Commonwealth, across the aisle, we're starting to see progress. And I can tell you that in my tenure, watching what has transpired at the federal level has truly given me hope and spurred me to continue on this path. And I do think that all of us working together can make a difference. I'd like to recognize Dr. Celeste Schwartz from Montgomery County Community College for a question. Dr. Schwartz.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just want to thank each of you for your work on this very important issue. As was indicated, I'm the vice president at Montgomery County Community College, and I'm representing the 14 community colleges in Pennsylvania. I also sit on the Kimber board. Many of you know that 10 years ago, an NTIA grant was awarded in Pennsylvania, and that Kimber has provided middle mile access to 51 of the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. My question really relates to the now and the after. What we've seen over the past several months is during COVID is a significant need for broadband access. And in Pennsylvania, we have two critical areas of need as have been identified. Our rural areas, and many of our community colleges are in rural areas, services students who today need to drive to locations that have public or external internet access, since lots of these places they can't go back to their classrooms. But in the more populated areas of the state, where we have a tremendous amount of internet access, what we've learned is that there is a much bigger access and affordability gap than I believe that we understood. So my question is this: many of the community colleges have taken their CARES dollars and invested them in learner laptops, hotspots, software, and in putting infrastructure in their parking lot to create hotspots so that students could come onto the campus to gain access. My question is this: when COVID funding goes away, we will still have these same needs. Is there any additional work being done around funding for in the area of accessibility to broadband?
Thank you very much for the question. I think you've nailed it right. The two sides of the digital divide, access and affordability. We do have an entire program called the Lifeline program that had been reoriented recently around internet connectivity, away from solely traditional voice communications. That's one avenue that we are using to address the affordability issue. Again, partnering with internet providers on their low-income programs. Many of them have launched new ones during COVID or expanded existing ones. I think those are two work streams that are going to continue regardless of when we're out fully of COVID.
And I would agree, Dr. Schwartz. Whether we like it or not, in Congress, we've been forced to have to deal with the circumstance in a time frame that we didn't expect to because of COVID and because of the increased need. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but the conversation is headed in that direction for sure. And in the meantime, we've sought the options that are available right now. And of course, the commissioner just mentioned, and others have as well, we have been lucky and happy to partner with some of our providers right now during this the pandemic. And I don't want to name some because then you potentially leave somebody else but some of the providers, quite honestly, most of the providers we've talked to have a program or have stood up a program, whether it's providing hotspots or whether it's literally providing a lower cost for the access, especially for students. Those things are out there. You know, I don't know how prolific they are, but I would say this: if we're not asking, I think we're potentially leaving something on the table. So we just can't assume that there's nothing available. We need to ask the local providers, see what they have available, and see if it fits the needs of those who are without right now, who are trying to work in this new circumstance.
Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. I'm going to pose a question to you. We've been working now for the past 2 years. We have traveled the Commonwealth. We have held hearings from Monroe County in the northeast of Pennsylvania all the way out to Fayette County in the southwestern part of Pennsylvania, here in Harrisburg. We have heard from providers. We've heard from end users. We have put forward a package of legislation. We're seeing this week 2 of those critical pieces: the bill that would create the funding mechanism to drive dollars out to spur and incentivize investment. We're seeing Senator Pittman's legislation, the House companion bill, that would remove some barriers from rural electric cooperatives, utilizing existing right-of-ways to spur further access of broadband, utilizing existing right-of-ways. We have legislation that will remove barriers on those telephone companies where we're still requiring them to do the same things that they did 20, 30 years ago, when they only account for 9% of our total voice subscription service. We are looking at utilizing existing state-owned assets to further deploy broadband. What else do we need to do here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania so that we can work well with the federal government and help our counties, our local municipalities, our school boards, and our people become better connected?
Well, thank you, Senator, for your leadership. And really, everything you laid out is exactly what we need to be doing. And the reality is we are making very substantial progress on closing the digital divide because of these reforms. If high-speed internet is coming to a town over or a home over from where you are, it doesn't feel like we're making any progress in this country. And I get that. Until you have the high-speed connection, you almost could care less about the data that we talk about. But the reality is the digital divide closed about 30% from 2016 to 2018. I think it's closed another probably total of 36, 37%. So the digital divide is closing. Internet speeds are increasing. New builds are happening at a record clip. And everything that you said is what matters: regulatory reform. We need to drive down the cost of building out internet infrastructure. When you do that, that flips the business case for communities that were unprofitable to serve to being profitable. Permitting costs have to continue to come down. Local governments need to continue to move quickly on applications. There's still other costs out there. If you're trying to cross a railroad, which happens a lot in rural areas, it can be a long, protracted process to get approval from the railroad to go under or over. That practically slows down builds in a real way. Federal lands is a challenge, more so the further west you go in this country than on the east, but the federal government is still too slow approving access to federal lands. And then to your point, state assets. If there are state rights-of-way, state buildings, we should be opening those up at cost for access, because the economic upside for a city, for a town, is not charging fees for an internet provider to come there. It is all of the economic growth that community is going to see once they allow that provider to build there.
Do you have any recommendations? Obviously, the last quarter mile requires small cells. And we have a challenge here. You know, I talk about connectivity and challenges with connectivity. People are shocked to know that even in the city of Philadelphia, we have connectivity issues. And one of those things I've noted is that the average cost to site a small cell is $270 nationwide. In the city of Philadelphia, it's $3,100 to site a small cell. Do you have any best practices, recommendations on how to make the siting of small cells more affordable? Because I think particularly for the more developed and more urban areas, decreasing costs will incentivize deployment. And you know, when I look at business case, you know, a company doesn't want to spend a lot of money for a small cell to go into a neighborhood that's not affluent and isn't going to buy high levels of service.
Yeah, I've been in downtown Philadelphia seeing some of those small cells go up, and you're right, we see exorbitant fees. We did take action, the good news is, at the FCC, and we adopted basically a presumption that $270 is the right fee. We did allow some wiggle room, so if a locality has a high cost that is a reasonable cost for some reason, we allow for that. But you see cities like San Jose that charge $1 million just as cable stakes to then start paying some of these exorbitant rates. This is a real impact. And look, I get it. If you're Philadelphia, you are a must-serve city. Providers are going to come to you almost regardless of the cost. I do think it limits builds even in places like Philadelphia, but the real hardship comes on the outlying communities. Capital outlays by internet providers are done oftentimes jurisdictionally. And if they're given X amount of dollars, a disproportion of that can go to serving Philadelphia, and then you don't get it in the outlying areas. So the federal approach we've taken at the FCC of this presumptive 270, I think is going to help. But a lot of states have also enacted their own small cell bills on top of or beneath the FCC's to really make sure people get, like, you know, whatever the costs were for a 200-foot macro tower, there's not the same cost for a small cell, and we need to recognize that.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Senator Hutchinson for a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have on the line today at this hearing, first we have Commissioner Carr, who earlier mentioned a workforce need, a trained workforce to deploy a broadband in various forms across the state. But we also have here today, we have training facilities, we have community colleges, representative from state system schools, but we also have companies and providers of service that you know, they're the ones who are going to employ people. And I'm curious to have a bigger conversation about, is there truly a workforce need, and what exactly, you know, what kind of skills, what kind of credentials, what kind of numbers are we talking about of a workforce, and actually what can the state do to help develop that workforce training to deploy the network as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I guess I'm just laying that on the table, and we have lots of folks who may want to weigh in on that, and I look forward to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I've spent a lot of time in this job in DC, I've tried to spend as little time in DC as possible. So I travel a lot and spend a lot of time with tower crews that are building out this infrastructure. And I've had a chance to climb a 2,000-foot broadcast tower in Rowena, South Dakota, just up a 1,700-foot tower in Florida a couple weeks ago, done water towers, small cells. And to a crew, they tell me they could double their workforce, that they have the amount of work to do that because there's such a boom in small cell builds and other infrastructure builds because of the work we're doing, but they have to turn jobs down. Right now, there's about 27,000 tower techs in this country. Industry estimates they could add 20,000 almost immediately, nearly double. If you were to expand that out to the linemen and fiber splicers, I'm told that's roughly 100,000 jobs that could be filled right now. So I've looked at community colleges. There was a program out of Aiken, South Carolina. That's a 9 to 12 week program. You can go in with almost, well, no skills at all, and you can learn the mix of classroom and technical climbing skills needed to land a good paying job in the tower industry. And think about this. You come in with no skills, 12 weeks later, and the starting pay is $50,000 to $60,000, and you can pretty quickly move up into six figures based on different opportunities in the tower industry. So these aren't, just a job. It's not a dead-end job. There's a lot of, there's a pun, upward mobility when it comes to this. And these are small businesses. A lot of people start out climbing towers, and then they launch their own. So I think a community college model is one worth exploring in Pennsylvania. We worked with Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They launched a community college program there for tower climbers. There's one in Raleigh, North Carolina that I went down and helped sign the paperwork to launch that one. And there's a couple of things that we've learned that make these successful. One is being physically co-located near a pretty big tower company that can provide some of the teachers that you would need, that can provide some of the equipment, and being in a community college that has a history of some trade work, so they understand the type of job. Those are some of the success factors. But there's a national association, the national, NATE is what it's called, National Association of Tower Erectors. They are working to expand community colleges as well, so that'd be worth looking at in this state.
Thank you. And that was an excellent question, Senator Hutchinson. In testimony at the hearing that we held in Indiana, Pennsylvania, at the request of Senator Pittman, we heard that when New York did a massive investment in expanding their broadband infrastructure, that the greatest impediment they had was finding enough people to fill the jobs. So certainly with Pennsylvania's unemployment rate right now, having good paying jobs that require, a 12-week course sounds like something that we should further investigate and work on. If I may right now, I'd like to open it up to anyone who has a question, who's Zooming in with us. If you could unmute yourself, identify yourself and ask your question, that would be fantastic.
Sandra Fyock from Purchase Line School District. If you can hear me.
We can.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and your committee. I was at Blue Spruce for one of your hearings, and I do appreciate the effort in finding out what the needs of the state are. I had a particular question, and I'm going to ask that our tech person ask it of you because it's technical, and I wanted to make sure we got it right.
We had talked about moving forward, even for temporary, using the existing fiber like on the 911 towers in these rural areas. Has that ever been talked about moving forward anymore?
The question was with regard to utilizing the existing towers of 911 systems for further deployment of broadband. Did I get that correct?
Yes, we had talked about in temporary situations, there's already fiber build-outs to these 911 towers in the rural areas. Can we use that fiber? They talk about putting temporary wireless solutions up during the pandemic to educate students.
We've been looking to reuse existing infrastructure as much as possible, both from an environmental and historic perspective. It's better to reuse an existing tower than to build a new one. And so we are increasingly seeing what we call co-locations, adding equipment on. There is a nationwide public safety network being built out by AT&T called FirstNet. I do believe they're looking to reuse existing infrastructure as well. But it used to be that each wireless provider had their own tower and their own antenna on it. And to your point, we're seeing a lot more of what we call neutral hosts. So a non-wireless provider, a Crown Castle, American Tower, owning the physical infrastructure and then leasing space to public safety and commercial users alike. In fact, we're voting next week at the FCC on a decision that would allow providers to expand the compound surrounding an existing tower so they can add backup power and potentially other components needed to add another structure. every time we get into this issue of the FCC allowing providers to expand their footprints, it does bump up against state and local authority. There is some preemption involved, and that's a sensitive subject, and particularly as someone that is a guest speaking in a state legislature, I am particularly sympathetic to that. Our job, though, at the FCC ultimately is to look at how do we facilitate a nationwide build-out, and so there is some preemption along the way, including in this decision next week where we're allowing a 30-foot expansion of existing tower sites with minimal review at the state and local level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will say, that Dave Kerr from AT&T, the company that is working on FirstNet, is on the call. And so certainly we always want to assure that our first responders in any emergency have full control of their communication systems. But I will say that AT&T has been talking with us about the possibility of just what you have suggested, finding a way that we can all work together to utilize those assets, of course, assuring that public safety has first priority and it is paramount. So thank you very much for that question. And I will say this, I want to make sure that even if you don't have questions, if you would like to make some comments before we finish up this hearing, we welcome that opportunity to listen to you and hear from you at both the state and federal level. So please feel free to introduce yourself and share any comments you may have.
Senator Phillips-Hill.
Yes, is that Wayne Campbell?
Yes, yes.
Wayne Campbell from the Grange.
Yes.
Thanks for
Thank you
joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate here today. I have a question and then a comment, if I may, and I'm not sure who to really direct a question to, but on the satellite technology, SpaceX, as I understand it, I believe just yesterday deployed 19 more satellites. But is broadband that's going to be available through SpaceX, is it still going to be susceptible to such things as solar flares or thunderstorms and snowstorms blacking it out, that somebody that's maybe utilizing telemedicine and is being monitored by a healthcare facility could potentially see, in some cases, maybe a half a day blackout? Could anyone tell me if that's technology has changed, or have they found a way to get through those clouds?
Thank you for the question. The technology has changed, and that's why the deployment of low Earth orbit satellites, SpaceX among others, is so exciting. So again, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of satellites orbiting, which means that a single end user could potentially receive service from multiple different satellites at multiple different angles, which can address some of the issues that you flagged that were problems with sort of legacy prior generation satellite technologies. We've also put requirements on in terms of if you were going to receive this federal funding to build out or to serve rural America, you need to meet certain quality of service levels. So that would be another guardrail to make sure that we aren't in that situation where someone is losing service because of the issues you noted.
And then my comment would, and thank you very much for that answer. And my comment would be, Senator Phillips-Hill, do you think there's any chance of Senate Bill 835 getting through during this fall session that would create a broadband authority or a line item budget that would fund the Office of Broadband Initiatives that the governor created, so that Pennsylvania has a central location, that it's not like 27 places to go, but no one really coordinating anything?
Well, we are at a point in this session where we are working very hard to get the entire package of broadband legislation over the finish line. And what I can tell you is that, you know, Senator Langerholtz's bill is key, and we are diligently working. Our hope is that the House will see fit to put it on the governor's desk and that the governor will see fit to sign it. And, you know, I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball, but I certainly think that it is possible and it's necessary. So thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you.
Senator Phillips-Hill.
Yes, sir.
I would just like to make a comment. We've discussed a lot about cellular service, 5G. The topography of Pennsylvania does not necessarily lend itself to cellular service because of the hilly terrain. You know, in our experience, it's also been a lifeline. You know, in many cases, we've had to provide students mobile hotspots, things like that. We've seen them provide service in the 3 to 4 meg range. But for the ongoing future, things like 5G, especially millimeter wave 5G, where the high bandwidths are going to be very difficult for the rural areas. I do see a lot of hope for the Starlink service, and hopefully that'll provide us more options in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right in many ways there. So we talk a lot about small cells, which predominantly operate in this millimeter wave spectrum, which is really high speed, high capacity, but to your point, over short distances. And that's part of why when we first act on infrastructure, we focus on these small cells because we need to accelerate the build out. We've now moved on and are making it easier to add 5G antennas to larger tower sites as well. We adopted an order at the FCC over the summer called the 5G upgrade order that does that. The good news about 5G is while the early talk was about millimeter wave and small cells, it is now being built out not just on mid-band, but we call low band spectrum. Low band has a far better propagation characteristics than millimeter wave. Rather than a couple blocks or a block of millimeter wave, low band spectrum can go for dozens and dozens of miles. So 5G is now being built out, including across the Commonwealth, on lower band spectrum as well, and that's how we're going to get to covering a high percentage of the population. In fact, when we approved the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile at the FCC, we put a condition on them that they build out 5G to 99% of the U.S. population. And that'll be across high band, mid band, and low band spectrum as well.
Thank you very much. That's good news. I understand that Commissioner Lohr from Fayette County has a question. Commissioner.
There we go. Sorry. It's probably more combination of comment along with just a quick synopsis of what we're doing, since Senator Stefano, my great senator from this area, asked if I would like to speak. And I think that's a great privilege to do that before you. I just want to thank everyone who's being a participant also, but we here in Fayette County, my fellow commissioners and I, are very aggressive in pushing for broadband. Probably about 3 years ago, my fellow commissioner and I started looking at different areas, and we have a local company called QCall Vitalink, who we contracted to move quickly with the CARES money. And we've designated $5.3 million to from the CARES money to get broadband across the county. It won't do the whole picture, but we're really working hard to make that happen. And then along with that, our redevelopment authority has looks like we've locked in a $2.5 million grant for another span of the broadband in our county along with that. But what's really some of the issues that I would like to bring to the Senate, to the committee, is that some of the issues that we run into naturally, and some of you are going to be very familiar with the letters, the alphabets, the DEP, PennDOT, and the state game lands. We really need a lot of help. With this being such a huge need across the whole state and across the whole country, we need these agencies to be more receptive. We just had part of our project closed down on Friday because of permit lags. and not being able to successfully get the permits here in time. And they've been in long enough because we've been in the project for at least probably about 35 days now. And they're moving quickly. And the way we have that set up as far as even pay structure coming off the CARES money is that every time they light up a spot, they get paid. And it's a program that we're watching, that CARES money, because I knew that one of the senators or someone on the committee mentioned about extending the time past the December 30th deadline. If that would happen, that'd be wonderful. But we're monitoring this very closely to make sure that we do continue to stay within those guidelines, but also get our jobs accomplished. We're pretty excited about this. We also have one of our grant writers working on the federal side where the digital program's coming up. That we're looking to try to actually make that happen too, with grant monies coming through that line. And then this same company, along with other companies here in the county, are going to be bidding on the auction side to get the residents the broadband along with that. So probably my biggest comment, more than anything else, if you can help us get through this permitting process on the state level, it would be wonderful. Just absolutely wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Commissioner, thank you. And I'm hearing this from counties all over the Commonwealth, including my own in York County. The length of the permitting process and the regulatory system is an impediment to expending those CARES dollars for connectivity. So I think you've told a wonderful story, better than I could have. Even better than your own senator could have. And these are
He's a great guy.
He is a great guy. But these are the people that need to hear that message. I'm concerned about that, and certainly using CARES dollars to connect people is an important function of our county government. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that everyone has said what they need to say.
Ryan Morcrett from St. Luke's.
Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Ryan Morcrett. I'm the operations lead for Telehealth and Clinical Communications, and I proudly represent St. Luke's University Health Network. Our network of 11 hospitals and over 450 ambulatory practices serves approximately 1.2 million patients in the Lehigh Valley and surrounding counties. The ability to successfully provide care virtually carried us through these unprecedented times, and I don't think anyone is arguing the value and benefits both for providers and patients that virtual care offers, including better access, increased healthcare compliance, and improved patient satisfaction, just to name a few. There seems to be unanimous consent across the healthcare that virtual care and telehealth will have an ever-growing presence after seeing this success during the COVID pandemic. With that said, our population still has many patients who do not have reliable connectivity to the digital world, either due to the economic disparity in the urban setting or geographical lack of access in the rural portions of our service area, which have been discussed here this morning. I'm pleased Commissioner Carr mentioned other technologies as well, because we see many opportunities in connected care technology to deliver high quality care and easy access for our patients. As we evaluate our approach to expanding these services to patients in need, we recognize the digital divide will be a continued barrier. At St. Luke's, we strongly agree with the Commissioner's assessment that there is a need to shift a degree of focus from brick and mortar to digital care, which relies upon infrastructure and access to deliver. As we move forward, we feel it is critical to close the technology access gap, both geographically and economically. We look forward to comprehensive legislation around telehealth in general, which has been stalled at the state level for several years due to abortion amendments unrelated to telehealth. Meanwhile, with expanded access, we could be saving children's lives to access with access to behavioral health providers. Did you know that 70% of the students in Lehigh County reported feeling sad most days over the past 12 months? Without access and reform, they can't get the care that they need. As always, we look forward to further discussion around tangible steps to make this improvement for healthcare access across our region. Thank you for inviting us to share our perspective on this important topic. This is not so much a question, rather a comment in our perspective. And I would welcome questions either now or offline after this session for our organization to weigh in.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership and your work on these issues. I think, hopefully one of the things that is good that comes out of the COVID-19 pandemic is that we reach a tipping point when it comes to telehealth. We have seen a massive increase in telehealth usage. I've just in the last couple of weeks been to Michigan, Ohio, Florida, and then earlier Nevada, and to a person, they talk about going, from a 20 to 30% increase in telehealth visits with COVID-19. And mental and behavioral health care is a key piece of that, as you noted. I was on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which runs along the border of South Dakota and Nebraska, and they had very little access to high quality care, but they now have a psychologist they can do remote video visits with that's located in a bigger city many, many miles away. We've got to break down access to mental behavioral health, and telehealth is one way to do it. People, particularly in small towns, they still have stigmas that they should not have about going in to see a provider. But if you can stay home and do a video visit, maybe that's one more person that'll reach out and get the help that is necessary. So hopefully we can get the licensing, the reimbursement right at the federal and state level so we can build on the success we've seen in terms of the uptake in telehealth.
Yeah, I would echo that. And just to piggyback on your comment, Commissioner, particularly to behavioral health, we saw an increase in compliance around 30%. So from prior to the pandemic and in-person care, who during the pandemic, we saw, a 30% increase of patients getting that mental health care that they needed. But we still have the barrier of lack of access, both as we're discussing here today to broadband, but also to devices and added to the complexity, the sharing of devices in households for work and for school. And, so then grandma's the last one to have a device to be able to access healthcare. So again, thank you for your insight. It's been very good to hear where you're heading at the federal level.
Thank you. And I'd like to recognize Josh Motzer from Lumen for a question.
Very good. Madam Chairwoman, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to present again in front of this particular committee. It was, just look back at the date, it was a year ago in September when we were in Penn State's campus in Fayette. And I appreciated the team or the committee hosting us at that particular point. So fast forward, clearly we didn't anticipate a global pandemic between now and then. And we have appreciated all of the efforts, both here at the committee level with the work that you've done, Chairwoman, on all the legislation you've sponsored, whether it's been regulatory modernization or streamlining of other processes here at the state level, and then obviously Commissioner Carr. We appreciate the comments that you've made and the streamlining you've done there at the federal level. And also, Congressman, thank you for participating as well. When I look back at the testimony that I provided a year ago, it's all the things that were mentioned here. It was the continued return on the investment need that can be supported by great programs like the Connect America Fund program that obviously the FCC, Commissioner Carr, helped to put forward. That program, which now is going into its sixth and final seventh year, putting for Lumen and obviously CenturyLink being a brand of Lumen, 30,000 living units there in Pennsylvania that didn't have broadband before that do. And we're excited about the prospects of what RDOF will be able to provide. I think it goes without saying, because I think it's been said multiple times on here, is that the competitive landscape and reforming that continuing to grow that competitive landscape while reforming the regulatory constraints that we have is essential. Senator Hughes mentioned the 9% number that our industry holds on the voice landline side. And we know that 100% of monopoly era regulation sitting on top of 9% of the customers doesn't make sense. So we'd appreciate the continued support there and the reform of leveling the playing field so that we can continue to invest in broadband and meet the demands of our customers. So I did have a particular question. I really answered all of my questions, but I really want to make sure we offered thanks for the continued support.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone who has participated here today. A special thank you to Congressman Perry for bringing Commissioner Carr here to Pennsylvania. Having that federal perspective, I think, really completes a lot of the work that this committee has done over the past 2 years. And as we look forward to this last week of session days, getting as much done as we possibly can, and recognizing that we'll have to start all over again in January. But we've come a long way. There's still more work to be done. And, I really just want to thank everyone who has engaged, not only in this discussion today, but throughout the course of this session. And I think it's been very informative. I think that it helps to frame what our agenda should be going into the new legislative session. And I am excited to continue our work and continue to assure that people are connected. I'm getting a text message from one of our will do Senator Hutchinson. So I think this is the largest hearing we've had with people joining us virtually. We have over 30 individuals joining us virtually. So thank you to our staff as well, who have been coordinating all of this technology for us. But with that, I will recess this committee to the call of the chair. Thank you again.